You get a moment so explosive that the entire room went silent, phones flew up, and the internet hasn't stopped talking since. At 55 years old, Shaunie Henderson thought she had finally escaped the shadows of basketball wives, rebranding herself as a woman of faith, elegance, and influence. But let me tell you, all it took was one voice. Leandria Johnson's voice do. R.I.P. that image to shreds. Eyewitnesses say Shaunie was on stage, preaching about authenticity, leadership, and grace. It sounded perfect until Leandria stood up. With no hesitation, she asked the one question Shaunie never wanted to face. How do you build an empire on tearing women down, and then stand here preaching about faith? The air shifted. Instantly, gasps, whispers, cameras rolling. And in that moment, Shaunie's control slipped. This wasn't just shade, this was exposure. A live confrontation that cracked open years of silence and put Shaunie's reputation on trial in front of the entire world. And trust me, once Leandria started speaking, there was no turning back. Shaunie Henderson, the name alone carries weight. To some, she's a trailblazer who took her messy reality TV beginnings and turned them into a platform for influence. To others, she's the woman who built an empire by throwing gasoline on drama and then pretending she never struck the match. But here's where it gets wild. Her past has never really gone away. And when Leandria Johnson opened her mouth, all those skeletons started rattling louder than ever. Let's rewind for a second. Before the gowns, pulpits, and women's conferences, Shaunie was the mastermind behind Basketball Wives, a show that wasn't about basketball and sure as hell wasn't about wives. It was about chaos, betrayal, broken friendships, and every drink thrown in a designer handbag. And let's be honest, Shaunie wasn't just the producer, she was the puppet master. She was the one pulling the strings while women ripped each other apart for ratings. For years, critics asked the same question: did Shaunie empower women, or did she exploit them? And for years, she dodged it with a smile, as if her new chapter erased the old one. But here's the shocking part: Leandria wasn't having it. She didn't care about networks, sponsors, or polished images. She saw Shaunie's rebrand as nothing more than a costume, and she was ready to rip it off in public. The confrontation didn't come out of nowhere. Leandria had been vocal for years about hypocrisy in church spaces, about leaders preaching love while living double lives. She wasn't the type to whisper behind closed doors. If she saw fake perfection, she called it out raw, unfiltered, and without fear of who got offended. So when Shaunie stood there at that faith-based gala talking about transparency, Leandria's patience snapped. She didn't just challenge her, she exposed her. Eyewitnesses claim Leandria's voice cut through the air like a warning siren. Transparency, she asked. Where was transparency when you cashed checks off women being humiliated on national television? Where was grace when you let broken families become punchlines? The room froze. Guests who had been clapping seconds earlier now sat stiff, eyes darting between the two women like they were watching a heavyweight fight. Shaunie, trying to keep her composure, replied the way she always does, with poise. She talked about growth, about how people evolve, about how God had transformed her. It sounded good, polished even, but Leandria wasn't buying it. She fired back, reminding everyone that growth without accountability isn't growth, it's performance. And here's where it got ugly. The whispers started, not whispers from strangers, but from insiders. Industry voices who had been silent suddenly started nodding in agreement. Gospel singers, faith leaders, and even a few ex-reality stars had apparently been saying the same things behind closed doors. Leandria just had the courage to say it on the mic. Within minutes, people in the audience started recording. Grainy clips, shaky camera angles, muffled audio, but enough. Enough to capture the fire in Leandria's voice, the unease in Shaunie's body language, the electricity in the room. These clips were like sparks, and once they hit the internet, they turned into wildfire. By the time the night was over, it wasn't just an event, it was a scandal. Hashtags popped up before Shaunie even left the building. Hashtag Shaunie exposed. Hashtag Leandria speaks. Hashtag faith vs fame. The story didn't just spread, it exploded. And the narrative was brutal. People weren't talking about Shaunie the leader, Shaunie the faith figure, or Shaunie the inspirational woman. They were talking about Shaunie the hypocrite, Shaunie the opportunist, Shaunie the woman who cashed checks off chaos and then tried to wash her hands clean. And let me tell you, this wasn't just gossip, it was history repeating itself, because the one thing people never forget is receipts. Old clips from basketball wives resurfaced overnight. Scenes of women crying, screaming, throwing fists, and in the background, Shaunie cool as ice, letting it all happen. Suddenly, her sermons about healing and empowerment felt like reruns of a bad reality show. Fans of Leandria rallied behind her instantly. They called her brave, fearless, authentic. They said she was the only one bold enough to speak the truth, that everyone else tiptoed around. Meanwhile, Shaunie's defenders scrambled, insisting she had the right to evolve, that dragging her past was unfair. But the imbalance was clear. Every one defender was drowned out by 10 critics, and that's where the storm truly began. Because once the public smells blood, the feeding frenzy doesn't stop. For Shaunie, this wasn't just about one confrontation. It was about her entire reputation being ripped apart piece by piece. And the wildest part, this was just the beginning, because by the next morning, what happened inside that ballroom had already spilled into the streets of social media, and the firestorm was growing bigger by the hour. The tension was already unbearable, but things spiraled completely out of control when Shaunie Henderson decided to clap back with the kind of corporate calm that only a woman with media power could deliver. Picture this, Leandria's voice booming like a Sunday morning choir solo, raw, uncut, fire from the soul, and Shaunie sitting back in her all-white designer suit, sipping her water like this was a boardroom debate instead of a spiritual battlefield. But here's the gag, Leandria wasn't holding anything back. She looked Shaunie dead in the eyes and said, "You don't own God's people. You don't own me, and you sure don't own his pulpit." Boom, that was the moment the entire room knew this wasn't about just a disagreement, this was war. Shaunie, though, wasn't folding. She came back with receipts of her own. According to insiders, she pulled up her phone mid-conversation and read out messages and emails showing Leandria allegedly agreeing to be part of certain church events, only to later flip and publicly denounce them. Shaunie accused her of being unreliable and reckless with her platform, and trust me, Shaunie said it with that same reality TV edge she used to check Basketball Wives cast members back in the day. The crowd gasped. People were whispering. Half the room was leaning toward Leandria, shouting, "Preach, sis," while the other half started side-eyeing her, wondering if maybe Shaunie had a point. It was chaos in real time, like a spiritual versus battle. No one signed up for, but Leandria wasn't going down easy. She doubled down, saying the whole receipts moment was nothing but manipulation, Shaunie using the same reality TV tactics she built her empire on, now dragging them into the church. And she wasn't wrong. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Shaunie playing the executive producer role, Leandria playing the raw, unpredictable star who couldn't be controlled. Then came the jaw-dropping bombshell. An audio clip leaked right there in the middle of the back and forth. Someone in the audience had it queued up on their phone, and within seconds, it spread like wildfire across social media. The clip, allegedly Shaunie speaking to a close church insider about controlling certain gospel artists' images so they wouldn't ruin the brand. She allegedly mentioned Leandria by name, calling her too volatile, too raw, and too unpredictable for God's platform. That was all Leandria needed. She stood up, pointed at Shaunie, and declared, "See? Y'all don't care about souls, you care about brands. But I'm not here to protect your brand, I'm here to protect my calling." The crowd erupted, shouts, claps, even some folks crying. It was no longer just a confrontation, it had turned into a revival, a courtroom, and a live taping of the messiest reality show ever, all rolled into one. But Shaunie wasn't backing off either. She reminded Leandria, and everyone else, that ministry still required discipline, structure, and accountability. Her exact words, according to an eyewitness, "A calling without accountability is chaos, and chaos doesn't save souls." It was heavy. It was tense, and it left the room split right down the middle. Was Shaunie right? That Leandria's unfiltered style was dangerous, even if it was authentic? Or was Leandria right that Shaunie's polished, brand-first church culture was killing the realness of the gospel? Now let's talk about the aftermath, because if you thought the confrontation itself was wild, the ripple effect after the cameras stopped rolling was 10 times worse. The moment Shaunie and Leandria's shouting match hit social media, the church world and the entertainment industry split right down the middle. Half the people were saying Leandria is finally speaking truth to power, while the other half were clutching pearls and defending Shaunie as a woman of grace under attack. But let's be real, this wasn't about grace. This was about money, control, and who gets to sit at the table of influence behind closed doors. Multiple insiders claimed that Shaunie immediately called her legal team. Yes, you heard that right, legal team. She was allegedly preparing to draft up contracts and NDAs to silence Leandria before her words spread like wildfire. But here's the kicker, Leandria refused to back down. She allegedly told someone in her camp, "They can't muzzle me if God put me here to speak. I'm gonna speak." That alone sent chills across the gospel community, because she was basically saying she'd rather risk lawsuits and blacklisting than let this thing slide. Now, let's zoom in on the industry reaction. Gospel radio stations started pulling Leandria's latest single off rotation, claiming it was a strategic pause. Really? Strategic pause. Everybody with common sense knew exactly what that was: retaliation. At the same time, Shaunie's camp started leaking carefully crafted PR statements to make it seem like she was the one being bullied. She painted herself as a woman standing firm in her walk with Christ despite being attacked publicly. But here's the shady part, none of those statements addressed the actual accusations. Not once did Shaunie deny gatekeeping or exploiting the platform for personal gain. She just pivoted, spun it, and tried to make herself look like the victim. Classic move, but here's where things got even more scandalous. Just a week after the confrontation, recordings started surfacing online, yes, actual audio clips from a closed-door meeting. In those clips, a voice alleged to be Shaunie's could be heard discussing how certain artists would never see the light of day unless they cooperate. Now, I'm not saying it was 100% confirmed to be her, but the timing was suspicious, and the fans connected the dots instantly. Hashtags like #SeanIExposed and #FreeTheArtist trended for days. Meanwhile, Leandria went live again and doubled down. She didn't just call out Shaunie this time. She named other industry figures who were allegedly benefiting from the same toxic system. It turned from a one-on-one feud into a full-on industry expose, and the fans ate it up. Thousands tuned in, dropping comments like, "Finally, someone has the courage to say what we've all been thinking, and this is about to shake the whole kingdom." But with all this firepower came consequences. Rumors started swirling that certain churches were canceling Leandria's upcoming appearances, citing a need for unity. Unity, please, that was code for she's stepping on the wrong toes, and we can't afford to get involved. At the same time, Shaunie was allegedly working behind the scenes to secure new deals, using the scandal itself as leverage. She was pitching herself as the strong woman who could weather storms and build bridges, and guess what? Some corporations bought it, because at the end of the day, controversy sells, and Shaunie knows how to flip it into opportunity. Now, here's the real question. Where does this leave Leandria? On one hand, she's risking everything: her bookings, her reputation, her relationships in the industry. On the other hand, she's gained a level of respect that money can't buy. People are calling her the prophetess of the industry, someone who's willing to say what everyone else whispers in private. That kind of boldness, it doesn't die down, it sparks a movement. And let's not forget, there's an even darker undertone here. Some sources claim that powerful figures connected to Shaunie were trying to smear Leandria's personal life, digging up old scandals, mistakes, and rumors to discredit her. And for a moment, it looked like the smear campaign might stick. But then, something shifted. Fans started defending Leandria, saying her past doesn't cancel her present truth. They rallied behind her, creating a wave of support. Shaunie's camp wasn't prepared for Dot. By the time all the dust started to settle, one thing was crystal clear. This wasn't just a fight between two women, this was a battle over the soul of an industry. Leandria represented the raw, unfiltered truth, messy, imperfect, but real. Shaunie represented the polished, curated image, safe, marketable, but allegedly controlled by gatekeeping. And when those two forces collided, it wasn't just entertainment, it was a wake-up call. Because, let's be honest, if Shaunie could really shut down artists the way the recordings suggested, then how many voices have we never heard? How many gifted singers are still in the shadows because they wouldn't play by the rules? That's the question fans are asking, and that's why the story isn't dying anytime soon. So, as the war continues, both women stand at a crossroads. Shaunie is fighting to protect her empire, while Leandria is fighting to burn down the walls that empire was built on. Who will win? That depends on who the people believe, and right now, the people are leaning toward the truth teller. No matter how messy her past may be, and if there's one thing we've learned from this saga, it's this: the gospel industry may try to silence its rebels, but once the truth hits the light, there's no going back, and there you have it: receipts, drama, and a confrontation that nobody saw coming but everybody needed to witness. The gospel world and reality TV circles will be buzzing for weeks after Leandria and Shaunie's fallout, and you better believe this is just the beginning. So what do you think? Did Leandria finally say what others were too scared to admit? Or did she go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation is nowhere near finished. And don't forget, like, share, and subscribe if you want the raw, unfiltered breakdowns of the scandals everyone else is whispering about. Most fearless voice in gospel collides with the most polished face of reality TV. You get a moment so explosive that the entire room went silent, phones flew up, and the internet hasn't stopped talking since. At 55 years old, Shaunie Henderson thought she had finally escaped the shadows of basketball wives, rebranding herself as a woman of faith, elegance, and influence. But let me tell you, all it took was one voice: Leandria Johnson's voice. R.I.P. that image to shreds. Eyewitnesses say Shaunie was on stage, preaching about authenticity, leadership, and grace. It sounded perfect until Leandria stood up. With no hesitation, she asked the one question Shaunie never wanted to face: how do you build an empire on tearing women down, and then stand here preaching about faith? The air shifted. Instantly, gasps, whispers, cameras rolling. And in that moment, Shaunie's control slipped. This wasn't just shade, this was exposure. A live confrontation that cracked open years of silence and put Shaunie's reputation on trial in front of the entire world. And trust me, once Leandria started speaking, there was no turning back. Shaunie Henderson, the name alone carries weight. To some, she's a trailblazer who took her messy reality TV beginnings and turned them into a platform for influence. To others, she's the woman who built an empire by throwing gasoline on drama and then pretending she never struck the match. But here's where it gets wild. Her past has never really gone away. And when Leandria Johnson opened her mouth, all those skeletons started rattling louder than ever. Let's rewind for a second. Before the gowns, pulpits, and women's conferences, Shaunie was the mastermind behind Basketball Wives, a show. That wasn't about basketball and sure as hell wasn't about wives. It was about chaos, betrayal, broken friendships, and every drink thrown in a designer handbag. And let's be honest, Shaunie wasn't just the producer, she was the puppet master. She was the one pulling the strings while women ripped each other apart for ratings. For years, critics asked the same question: did Shaunie empower women or did she exploit them? And for years, she dodged it with a smile, as if her new chapter erased the old one. But here's the shocking part: Leandria wasn't having it. She didn't care about network.